Could the infamous Alcatraz prison in San Francisco really be haunted? Ghost hunters have found that certain parts of the island and the prison itself have a certain kind of strangeness to them. If one were to take a look into the brutal history of this prison and some of the more infamous criminals housed there, it would be easy to understand why some people believe the halls of the prison are still haunted by the criminals who lived and died there. Let's discover these 7 creepy and unexplainable ghost stories from the infamous Alcatraz prison. Number 7. The history. Before we explore the ghost stories of Alcatraz, let's explore some of the history. Alcatraz opened its doors in the late 1850s, with the first inmates being military prisoners that were forced to build a new prison. This prison was later known as the Rock. The US Army held military prisoners on Alcatraz Island until 1933, when the federal government decided to open up a minimum privilege maximum security penitentiary for some of the most incorrigible inmates in the country. Alcatraz was built to break the spirits of the worst prisoners by putting them in structured, monotonous routines until the day of their release. Prisoners had only 4 basic things: their clothes, food, shelter, and medical care. Prisoners would have to earn anything outside of those 4 basic needs. Famous criminals of the prison include Al Capone, Alvin Karpis, George Machine Gun Kelly, and Arthur Doc Barker. Mobsters that found themselves in other prisons were able to manipulate guards into giving them special favours, but that would never happen in a place like Alcatraz. Everyone was equal. They could not corrupt the prison guards. Number 6. Brutal punishment of Alcatraz. Prisoners that refused to follow the rules or do as they were told risked finding themselves in the strip cell. This cell was built into the lower tier of D block. Inmates would be put inside a dark cell, stripped naked, and given nothing but bread and water once a day. Occasionally, they would be given a meal and a mattress to sleep on at night, but it wasn't guaranteed. The closest thing to a toilet in the cell was a hole in the floor, and there wasn't a sink. While convicts were in the strip cell, they would have no contact with others, spending all their time alone in the dark. The D block housed 5 whole cells spread across the lower tier that were similar to this strip cell. Prisoners would be sent to the hole for up to 19 days and kept in isolation. These cells had a toilet, sink, and a light bulb at least. Prisoners would also be given a mattress to sleep on, but they only had it during the night. Number 5. The closure of Alcatraz. As the prison was built on an island, it was purposely kept isolated from the public, where tales of inmates getting tortured and their bitter spirits coming back to haunt the prison soon became myths. These stories would eventually spread to the general public. Alcatraz was closed in 1963 due to the high cost of refurbishing it, making it more cost-effective to simply close the place down. It was reopened later on by the United States Park Services as a tourist attraction complete with public tours. Let's take a look at some of the more famous ghost stories and hauntings of Alcatraz. Number 4. The ghost stories. One area of the prison that is considered to be the most haunted is a utility corridor where inmates Kretzer Corin Hubbard was shot dead while attempting to escape. A night security guard reported hearing clanging sounds from inside the corridor in 1976. Our first story comes to us from cell 14D, which served as one of the aforementioned hold cells. It's believed by many to be considerably active with spirits. Employees and visitors alike have reported feeling a sudden coldness and claim that there is sometimes an intensity encompassing the cell. One of the most well-known stories about cell 14D dates back to the 1940s. A prisoner in the cell reportedly screamed all throughout the night that he was being killed by a creature with glowing eyes. When guards opened the cell to check on him the next day, they found that he had been strangled to death despite being in the cell alone. No one ever claimed responsibility for killing the convict. What's interesting is that when prison guards were doing head counts the next day, they counted an extra prisoner. Some guards claimed to see the dead convict lined up with the others, but he was only there for a second before disappearing. They had counted his ghost among the prisoners, which is why they had an extra one. Another story surrounding the prison is that of Warden Johnston, who earned the nickname the Golden Rule Warden. It's said that the warden experienced some bizarre events, including one case in which he was escorting guests around the prison. The story goes that the warden and his guests heard sobbing from inside the prison walls before the group were hit by a sudden cold wind. Johnston was never able to explain either occurrence. Other mysterious accounts have been reported by visitors of cell block A and B who claimed to have heard crying and moaning. Psychic Sylvia Brown claimed that she'd felt a presence from one of the cells while doing a reading of the prison. She was able to identify the presence, but only by the name Butcher, and there was no exact information on who or what was in the cell. After further research, they discovered Abby Malevitz had been killed in the cell. Abby Malevitz was a mob hitman known as Butcher. Had the psychic encountered the ghost of a mob hitman? Number 3. Ghost of Al Capone. The ironic fact about Al Capone was that with all of his murderous deeds, he was jailed not for murder but for tax evasion. Although Al Capone spent most of his final years in Alcatraz, he did not die there, but at his mansion in Florida. However, his health had started to decline in prison from untreated syphilis. It was during this time that he began playing the banjo and joined a prison band. Capone was worried that he would be killed if he was to spend his recreational time out in the prison yard, and managed to secure permission to spend his recreation time practicing the banjo in the shower room of the prison. A park ranger has come forward in recent years claiming to hear banjo music coming from that same shower room. The park ranger wasn't familiar with the history of the prison and so was unable to find a reason for the sound. Employees and other visitors have also reported hearing the sound of banjo music coming from the walls of the prison. The fact that Capone didn't actually die in prison possibly means the banjo music is more likely to be a residual haunting, where his emotional imprint has been left behind rather than his actual spirit. Number 2. Other ghosts that haunt Alcatraz. Native Americans felt that the island was filled with bad spirits and were even known to take some of their own people to the island as a form of punishment. If the crimes were especially bad, the people would be left on the island to fend for themselves indefinitely. The Native Americans believed that people who were left on the island would die and would be tortured by the evil spirits haunting the island for all eternity. It's interesting to note that the Native Americans used the island as a form of punishment even before it was one of the toughest prisons in history. Maybe the island was destined to become a prison of one kind or another. Centuries after these rituals and after the prison's closure, Alcatraz has become a notorious landmark, complete with rumours of spirits dwelling within. There is an almost endless number of stories of people hearing, feeling, and even occasionally seeing ghosts, spirits, and other anomalies. These spirits are genuinely believed to be prisoners who have died within the last century or so, but what if the Native Americans are right and the legacy of evil spirits dwelling on the island goes back not just one, but many centuries? Number 1. The Old Lighthouse and Other Hauntings. There is another mystery surrounding Alcatraz that, while less scary, is still very intriguing. This story regards the Old Lighthouse. The original lighthouse on the island was torn down by the time the prison was opened to the public. Even so, some people believe that the old lighthouse reappears on foggy nights and lights up the dark sky with its bright beacon. If Alcatraz is indeed haunted, most people believe it is done by some of the prisoners that died turning on the old lighthouse. No one can say for sure if Alcatraz is haunted or not, but it's hard to deny that the island certainly has a rich and unsettling history.